Then with that, John, Mr. Chair, I will turn it over to you. We have the webinar for attendance, and considering we spent all that great time doing that, I would just welcome everyone to our coordinating council meeting, and thank you for making the time to join us. And we'll turn it over to John Carmichael, our chair, to get us started. And Maya, could you put up our first slide, please?
All right, thank you, Jeff, and thanks everybody for being here this morning. I guess 9 a.m., not 9:30 on May the 4th. So our first two items are approving the agenda and approving the minutes from our last meeting, February 2021, by consent. So do we have an agenda to display, or expect everyone has that to see if there's any comments on the agenda? There we go. So anybody have any comments on the agenda? Raise your hand. Seeing none here, we'll consider the agenda approved, and then any comment or discussion on the minutes from February 2021. All right, seeing no comments on them, the minutes stand approved. And our next item is public comment. Let's say if any members of the public wish to make a comment, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, I'm not seeing any. I'm assuming that your little box there is updating itself.
Yes, Maya has that as she is presenting, so we should be good to move on to Julie and the funding decision document when you're ready.
Okay, sounds great. Then Julie, take it away and talk to us about the funding decision document for this year.
Okay, thank you, John. The funding subcommittee met to consider the recommendations that came through the operations advisories committees and then through the coordinating council. And the question was to consider the projects that were at the very end of the life cycle and would be ending the step down process. The funding subcommittee has made the following recommendation: that the projects that are in the step down process, could have a single-year hiatus, and that all of their 2022 proposals should include a short summary of why the extension was needed by their partner specifically, and then also if the funds from the previous year were spent in either accomplishing their goals or perhaps possibly in some cases staff were paid even though they weren't able to accomplish the goals simply because of COVID or for some other reason. So these are the recommendations from the funding subcommittee.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And so considering the discussion that's gone into the step down process over the years, I just wanted to see if there was any discussion on this from the committee. And Julie, do you think it's best to do that now or review the actual language? I think it's probably fine. This lays out the gist of it to at least see if there's support for that at this point before we go on.
Sure, just let me know when you want me to review the language.
Sure, let's see. So Megan, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Morning, Julie. I had a couple questions, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
My first question was, I saw there was a Appendix A with the projects. So would those projects have gone to zero in fiscal year 2022? Am I reading that right?
Yes, you're reading that correct. Those projects would have gone to zero, and the hiatus allows them to remain in their year 6, which is essentially 66% reduction from their baseline.
Okay. And then my second question is, I guess I'm trying to figure out like where the crunch is going to be in terms of funding, because it seems like, if I'm understanding correctly, we're now going to have 7 years of projects. I think under the maintenance funding, because the projects that will go from new to maintenance are now year 0 instead of year 1. So am I understanding that correctly, that there'll basically now be more projects under the maintenance funding, and that will last kind of until that year 0 suite of maintenance projects moves through the system?
That was actually discussed at the operations committee, and hopefully I made all of the appropriate corrections in the coordinating council materials. There was a misinterpretation in the way that the language was written for the operations and advisory committees, that the intent of the funding subcommittee was that all maintenance proposals would be in a 1-year hiatus. And the operations folks clarified that that was actually supposed to not be all maintenance projects, but only those maintenance projects that were actually in the step down process, which would be somewhere in that series of 33% reductions, which at this point is only those that were actually in the year 6. So it doesn't actually extend the maintenance series for all maintenance projects.
Okay, so this would be more of a short-term crunch for the maintenance funding as opposed to a longer-term one.
Correct. It's a 1-year hiatus for those that are in the step down.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next up I see Dee.
So to follow up on that question, so those that are in the new category this past year, and if they submit again, they will move in the maintenance categories, correct? And if that is so, that means that the maintenance category expands quite a bit with those that should have rolled off or in there, along with new projects moving into the maintenance category, making that category highly competitive. And I reckon it would still go through the review process. I'm just thinking this through as far as rankings, but someone's going to get cut short here. So even though they're in the step down, doesn't necessarily mean that they will be approved for funding next year. Is that correct?
Correct, Dee. So if there are projects that were maintenance or new last year, they would, and they continue, they would become maintenance, and then the ranking process would kick in. So if it exceeds that 75% threshold, then the projects that fell to the bottom, regardless of whether they are in year 6 or year 2, then those the rankings would take effect.
Yeah, that is. I mean, we can allow the criteria to let projects fall where they may. We could still get new projects under the new category. So that keeps innovation, but I just worry that some of these newer projects that may want to go into a maintenance mode just for a couple of years may get shortchanged because these longer term may rank higher. I'm just trying to think through how this is going to work out, but thank you for the clarification.
That's a good point. All right, thank you, Dee. And next up I see Lynn.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I just wanted to continue the discussion because it looks like from the way that I'm reading this that if your states would need to provide a rationale as to why they need this hiatus. And so I guess that would mean that they're gonna provide this appendix with a summary of why the extension is needed and if there were any funds from the previous year that were not spent. So I guess that means that ultimately this body would decide whether a request is granted. I'm just wondering what that, where that, I guess the operations committee would make a recommendation and the coordinating council would decide. Is that how that would work?
Yeah, Lynn, sorry, I was muted. The funding subcommittee basically felt that it was appropriate for everyone to actually voice the reasons why there was this need for the extension, and also to note whether or not they had spent the funds from the previous year, because if the funds hadn't been spent and there has been an extension, then theoretically there are funds available and you don't need the additional funds. There's no move to actually make that an official part of the rankings, but the idea of the appendix is to make that information available during the decision process.
And so, Julie, the expectation is that I'm assuming there'll be ops review of the situation, a recommendation from the ops, and then a decision by the coordinating council?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so this has been discussion. I think it has helped clarify the situation. So I guess, Julie, one question I had, and I'm not sure that it's fully clear, certainly in the language of the statement, is it intended that this is a done deal for folks, or is it actually intended that, as we just discussed, this is more of an opportunity and you're going to have to provide a justification? So, I think some of the questions that should be added are: one, are you asking for an extension? If so, why is it needed? Are there funds from the previous year? And how are those funds from the previous year potentially going to be used in this extended year? So ending up with, how much additional funds are you asking for the extended year?
Yeah, so the funding subcommittee hadn't, I think your additional questions are actually very appropriate. What the funding subcommittee was looking for was to give everyone this equal opportunity to apply for these extra funds, mostly because, there was the recognition that if extra funds were available, most partners leadership would say, there's no reason to try to apply for extra funds. And I know that Kathy is on the phone and she was part of this discussion as well, and Bob as well, because he chairs that committee. So if either of them have anything to add to my answers, please jump in and supplement. But I think adding your question, John, about do you need the extension? I think that's a valid question to ask.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And I see, Bob, you have your hand up?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think your word's exactly right, John, which is this is an opportunity for the partners, not a guarantee. So that, we have to go through, or each partner will have to go through the application process and justify the extension and exactly how much they need, if there's any money left over from the previous year, et cetera, et cetera. So this isn't, a guarantee that those, I forget, it's 5 or 6 projects get funding carried over to 2022. It's just if there are circumstances in your jurisdiction that need extra help because of COVID or budget shortfalls with your legislative process or whatever it may have been, but provide that in your application, and then we'll work it through the ops committee advisors and ultimately the coordinating council approval process.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I agree. I'm glad the funding subcommittee talked about this, and we're considering this, knowing that last year was a pretty unprecedented year and likely threw monkey wrenches into some plans at the states for getting off of this funding as legislatures turn their attention to more pressing issues to them, certainly in dealing with COVID. So, Richard Cody, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, John, I just had a question. If the proposals are supposed to include a short summary, and there are two basic questions they have to answer. Why is the extension needed, and are there any funds from the previous year that were unspent? It seems to me that the second question could apply to any proposal that was funded the previous year. And it could be part of the decision-making process to fund for the following year. I just wanted to know if there's some clarification on there, if it's just targeting the step-down projects that are in their final year, or if it applies to all maintenance projects.
So
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Julie, I wonder if y'all talked about that, and if not, certainly that's something that could help head off the issue that Dee raised about the squeeze on maintenance projects that's expected.
yeah, this question is part of the appendix because it's something that the funding subcommittee wanted the folks who are asking for the extension to respond to specifically. However, the unexpended fund is a report that the operations and advisors review at all of their meetings. So we as staff will go to both of the regional offices and they show us all of the rewards, and it shows, you know, this was the amount of the award, this is how much has been expended at this point, this is when it expires, and this is how much is left. So the operations and advisory committee is regularly reviewing essentially how those awards are being spent down and reminding folks to get an extension if necessary, or, you know, in the case of Florida, they ended up not needing a little bit of money and they were able to put it back into the process. So we're at that level, there's a consistent review of sort of the unexpended funds. So we don't ask everyone to specifically provide that. This is just something that they wanted as part of the appendix for this group. But as an overall, we do review that report on a very regular basis.
Thanks, Julie.
All right, so seeing no further hands, if anyone will give you a second, but I think we can probably move on, Julie, now that we've provided, I think, good clarification on this.
Okay, great. Maya, if you can go to the next slide. Keep going. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the summary of changes. This is the language that was put in the RFP and in the funding decision document. It's the same language, it's just duplicated. And this is what explains the all maintenance projects in the step down process will be in the same year of the step down process as they were for FY21. So before I move to the next slide, is there any questions about this language or any edits that folks feel should be made to this language?
Well, Julie, I do think it probably should be updated a bit to not make it so sounding like such a guarantee. You know, it says the process will be paused. And I think something that makes it clear, as we discussed, that it's an opportunity to pause it and submit a justification and have that evaluated.
Okay, thank you.
Megan?
Thank you. I might just need more coffee this morning, but I think I'm still a little confused. So I'm reading all maintenance projects in the step down process will be in the same year of the step down process as they were in 2021. So what I'm thinking is in 2022, like a year one maintenance project would still be in year one, but then in 2023, you will have the projects from 2020 that were new that apply to maintenance in year one, but you will also have the projects from 2022 that were year zero maintenance go into year one. Is that correct? So I guess I feel like there's still going to be this crunch of year one maintenance projects in 2023, but maybe I'm thinking about this wrong.
Yep, and I think it's and this is something that we had language with the step down, the portion of the step down project process is those projects that are already receiving some sort of cut to their baseline. So if you're, there's that in these ending years, it's that, you get your baseline minus 33, then minus 66, and then you go to 0. And so if they were in that step down, they're getting the extension. And so it doesn't apply to if a maintenance project is just applying without part of that reduction, then they aren't considered to be in the step down process. So I can tweak that language just to, there aren't any projects that were in year 5, so I can tweak that language and have it simply say that the projects that were in year 6, and that should make it clearer, simply because step down process would apply to year 5 or 6, and there is no year 5. Would that help, Megan, to make it more clear as to which projects are affected by this?
Yeah, that would help. Thanks, Julie.
And Julie, this is Jeff. Another opportunity would just say the 7 projects listed in Appendix A in the funding decision document. So the language already has Appendix A of the FDD, the funding decision document. But just for committee members' awareness, it's those specific 7 projects.
All right, so does that sound good? Any other comments on this? And Julie, are you clear with the intent?
Yep, I think I'm good. So Maya, can you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. Okay, so the other changes that were made, all of the dates have been updated so that they're relevant. The July meeting language in the funding decision document, that has been changed to simply note that the PIs are invited but not required to be at the July meeting, so that they can answer questions and hear feedback on their proposals. This is something that everyone has found to be very useful, so we wanted to make it clear that it was a place where we wanted to include the PIs. We've updated all of the references for year 6 to just say year 6/7, so that it addresses the funding decision document. And then also the biological review panel and bycatch prioritization committees have completed new matrices that'll be in effect for the next 2 fiscal years. And so both of those documents have been updated. And those are all of the updates to the RFP for FY22.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So I did have one question on the second bullet, including PIs. I'll put on my budget hat and say, is this something that ACCSP would support the travel of, or is this on them, or would they be participating via webinar or something?
It's only ever a webinar. The July meeting is always a webinar. It's usually a 1 or 2 hour meeting. And the purpose of the Ops July meeting is just to do the initial review of proposals. And we find that as we go through the proposals, it's helpful to have the PI there, so that when someone says, I don't understand what this means, the PI can not only explain it to the group, but hear that's the question. And that way, when they revise their proposal, they're able to revise it in a way that actually clarifies things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. And since this meeting's always webinar, we do not have to worry about any added expense. So excellent suggestion. And I don't see any other hands, so we can probably continue on.
Okay, those are all the summary of changes. So I think I'll pass it back to you, John, and to Jeff for any potential action.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. So we would be looking for a motion to approve the RFP. I expect it'll be as modified. Lynn, I see your hand.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make that motion to approve the FY22 request for proposals as modified today, or if somebody wants to tweak that language so it's better, that's fine.
I think Jeff has it up here for us. Yes. So motion to approve the FY22 funding decision document in RFP as presented. I think Jeff, just make that as modified or as presented and modified.
Yep, and Maya is actually helping us out on the screen work, so she's taking care of that for us. Thank you, Maya.
Excellent. Thank you, Maya. Well done. And do we have a second? I see Jason, do you have your hand a second?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's a second.
All right, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Please raise your hand.
Lynn, your
Okay.
hand's still up, but I'm pretty sure you're not objecting.
Oh, sorry, going down.
Yeah. All right, seeing no objections, the motion stands approved. All right, so I think the next business is the program updates.
Yes, John, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Maya, when you're ready to switch back to the presentation. Fantastic. One more slide, please. All right, the agenda for the program update is kind of up on screen, and we'll jump through this. Thanks, John and committee, for getting us, and Julie for getting us this far, this efficiently. So fantastic. And a couple of themes that kind of run through all of these, and what I wanted to present to you today is both some coordination and metrics that have to do with these topics as we go through. A little bit more of what we've accomplished so far this year, and in only a few cases do we kind of say this is the plan for the rest of the year. But with that, let's kind of jump in and go one more slide to the committee newsletter. Perfect, thank you. So the newsletters have been big on your agenda for a while now. Everybody likes how the committee newsletter is going out and the highlights, but a little bit of the metrics that we were able to pull from how it goes out. The newsletter goes to about 130 people or email addresses distinct per month, and the average kind of 50% click rate of opening the email as well as following the links in it is actually pretty high for the outreach industry. And we've gotten a lot of eyeballs and contact points on finding out who your other committee members are, checking the monthly calendar, which includes not just ACCSP activities, but some of the other major meetings as well. We found ourselves constantly kind of saying, well, wait, when does this other group meet? So we added some of the major, council and commission meeting weeks to the ACCSP calendar as well as following the highlights towards things like the data warehouse. And we've got updates on that a little bit later. So we think not only is the perception of the newsletters doing a good job of getting each committee to be aware of what the other committees are doing and foster a bit of partner collaboration within house. Hey, this happened at coordinating council. Let me check with my council member. This happened at a technical committee. Let me check with that technical committee member and get a few more details. So that was pretty great. And one of the things that is coming up next about committee newsletters is the advisors campaign and request for new members is coming up next month. I believe that's going to be in the May newsletter, and in the recent article development for fisheries focus and things is also kind of the interviews that we're having with some of the advisors and Jerry Morgan as well. So highlights on committee newsletters. Jumping forward, the next slide, Maya, please, was really just an update, is a highlight on some of the things to keep the trains running, but we've always paid attention to information systems and security. The real task here is, of course, to balance functionality to staff and end users, the security of those, the data and the other information that we're passing around, and the resources, both in the house of staff and contractors, and what partners can provide. And so just a couple of quick notes here. It's been a busy several months on infrastructure. The safest database was implemented with both new hardware and moving up to Oracle 19 and patching that up the ways. The email configuration was updated. You've probably seen plenty of things in the news about different email security items. We've updated 3 of the 6 data connections with our federal partner systems. 2 others will be updated probably in the next month. We just had a call last week with the OCIO and a couple of the regional partners to implement some updated and improved security in those connections. And then the data warehouse, kind of circling back up to the top, we'll get the upgrade to Oracle 19 this summer. And I mention those things here because they're functional and they help, but the versions of Oracle that can talk to each other, it does take a bit of coordination with our partners to make sure that everybody can still continue to communicate and get the information that they need on a regular basis. With FSMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, we gained the authority to connect last summer, and part of that is quarterly self-assessments. The security team is Ed Martino, Julie DeFilippi Simpson, and myself, and part of that agreement is an annual external audit, and that was just completed over the last 2 months with a high amount of activity and interviews and tweaks to our systems and documentation. That really was, we had a contractor doing the external audit, but Ed was supporting that whole process, and he did a great job getting us through that. Fantastic progress, strong security posture overall. We have half of the recommendations that we had last year, and those are really at a more granular level and raise a couple of areas for improvement. Some of those are process and documentation. A couple of them are technical tweaks to the systems. But anyway, it's something that is continuing and ongoing. This is our 2nd year in the solid FSMA process. It's kind of the 3rd year where we've been looking at these and moving towards FSMA and monitoring. So it's an ongoing phase. It's getting a bit easier as we bring ourselves up to these levels, and appreciate the work that's gone into it, and we've maintained the confidentiality and the functionality at the same time. So that's it for the info systems and security update. Next slide, we move into some of the recreational activities. And what I want to highlight here is there's 3 slides. The first one provides a bit of an update of activities that are going on right now. And then the next 2 are items that I want to raise awareness for and ask for your feedback either during this call or afterwards. But of course, weather's getting warmer. Folks are able to get out and get sampling, and MRIP has provided, as we mentioned last year, through the Modern Fish Act, additional funding for APIS sampling to reduce the standard error on the estimates. That's for the Atlantic, about $900,000 a year. That translates to about 2,100 assignments, and the table shows kind of that percentage of how many base assignments for site assignments occur each year, how many were added on, and what those percentages are. And again, those percentages are really based on where there was a longer season, greater species diversity, or a need for additional sampling. And certainly want to call out a thank you to the states that have traditionally and continue to do their own state-funded add-ons above and beyond what this base is. And that's Massachusetts, Rhode Island does some, Delaware does, as well as North Carolina. So thanks to the states that add on all those extra things. The for-hire telephone survey conduct has been, MRIP has made a bunch of changes to the vessel directory, including which vessels are doing logbooks and the HMS permit integration. That adds to calling efficiencies for the states, as well as kind of clarity of how the data are collected. And within the FHTS, we're continuing to make incremental improvements to the system to make those calls, which really, while it's a centralized cost at the moment, it saves time and effort out at the states, as well as in the data checking that the recreational team does on a monthly basis. And we're beginning to put on our radar planning for 2022 and the social economic add-on survey. And that is done about every 5 years. The Atlantic Coast did it in 2017. The Atlantic and Gulf are going to be doing it in 2022. And MRIP has provided some additional funds to integrate that and program that into the tablet data collection that the field samplers are using. And so once that's programmed through our side of that, it'll be done in coordination and conjunction with the Gulf of Mexico and the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission. So we'll hand that development right over to them as well. They're using the tablets this year, and so far getting some good feedback on that, and they have a desire to also implement the FHTS computer-assisted telephone interview. So they're looking into that as well. And that's really just a big highlight to the sharing relationship between us and how the funds and the effort we've put into developing it gets shared and becomes more valuable the wider the bases that gets used. Your next item, Maya, move forward one slide, please. This is an upcoming item. The recreational implementation priorities are something that really helps MRIP guide the regional priorities across the country to come up with the strategic plan. So MRIP's updating their 5-year strategic plan this year. And this is a good time for the Atlantic to update our recreational implementation plan and priorities. Last time that was done in 2017, we kind of did a full bottom-up process, and Rec Tech Committee was very helpful in not just defining the priorities in these 6 items, but also filling in the details of that document. So that's what is the need, what is the next approach, what is the dollar value of what would be requested. And this really guides across the board where MRIP heads and highlights the need for all the partners, the councils, the states, and everybody to weigh in on this process, and so that it becomes a helpful document. As we move forward, the question I have for you as a group is, are these 6 items still the top priorities in this order, or are there additional items that you'd like Rec Tech and staff to work through and add in as potential other sources? And when we presented this to the operations committee last month, we did have one email follow-up that suggested that volunteer angler reporting and citizen science was certainly an item. I will note that is starting in some work for that is starting in the 2021 action plan, goal 3 for ACCSP. And we're also supporting an AFS symposium this November in Baltimore about volunteer angler reporting and some of the standards. However, that's likely to remain an area of interest of what data are best collected via citizen science to supplement the MRIP general survey. So that's one item that we put in here. And what I would ask is, if you've got discussion items, I will pause at the end of this slide. Or if you wanted to just simply email Alex DeJohnson and myself any ideas that you'd like explored that are bubbling up. So at this point, I'll just take a moment and look for hands if there's requested discussion.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And we'll give a minute for some hands. I see some going up. So I think that this is a big topic. So, we'll get some suggestions here. But then, Jeff, I think I'd like to hear some about the timing and the plan, and to make sure that we have adequate time to talk about it, because it's very critical. So I think, Dee, your hand was up first. So Dee Lupton.
So I'll just put it on a list that we could discuss later, and I really don't put it in the citizen science category, but we need some real-time reporting in the recreational industry. I know that's been out there for a long time for, more I hate to call them quotas, but they're quotas. And that we're getting a lot of pressure in our own state to develop something real time. And I really won't even say it supplements MRIP. I would say sometimes it may need to replace the general survey, because it should be census level, much like on the commercial side. So I'd like to see that as some sort of priority, maybe not for implementation, but some discussion and develop of a program that can be either species by species or coast-wide. I don't know how to address it. So that's one I'd like to see discussed.
Thank you, Dee. Next, I have Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually just frantically writing down what Dee was saying. I actually wanted to go back a slide. I just wanted to comment on the 2022 Cs add-on to the survey, and just really make a plea that there be some sort of fairly intensive public outreach about this, whether it's web-based or handouts to the states somehow that can go out with fishing licenses, so that people understand why this data is important. Because it's been our experience that people freak out when you start asking them some of their economic data. And I know in Maryland, and in our case, I'm a little bit talking now about charter and head boats, but it certainly goes for the general public too. People tend to refuse interviews when you go into that economic stuff. So I just wanted to bring that up and hope that there's some sort of plan to really get some outreach out there. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Yeah, it's a good point. Next, we have Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll start with saying, the current priorities look right to me, and they seem to be in a sensible order as well. I'll follow on by saying I agree with what Lynn just said. I think that's important. There's hopefully plans for something like that, but I think it will help certainly the folks that are out, on the streets, as they say, if that word is kind of out there ahead of them, that's helpful. And then to the comments that Jeff led off with and that Dee spoke to, I think I'm very interested in that as well. I don't know that we can ever get to, levels of, census level data. It's certainly something to strive for. But one thing that I was more thinking about by way of extending this notion of citizen science and volunteer angler information is not just the collection of it, but how do we integrate that into the overall set of information that we have? So I think it's kind of twofold, the collection mechanism. I think we have lots of good, ideas and tools that are sort of developed for that kind of thing. It's that second step of, people are making this effort, collecting this data, and then it's, used indirectly or, not used at all. So I think figuring out ways to integrate it into the management realm, I think is sort of a supplement to that concept. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And, Jeff and Julie, I think one I would add is as we mentioned, things to discuss later, is some way of getting better resolution on recreational effort. Characterizing things as a trip being in the EEZ in a private boat really doesn't do justice to the variety of fishing effort and techniques and ways of targeting different species that's going on out there. And I've long felt that's one of the reasons we end up getting some really odd estimates at times and struggle with some of these other fisheries that have fairly specific methods and specialized techniques. And so, Rich Cody, I see your hands up.
Yeah, just a couple of things. As far as Lynn's request about outreach for Cs, I'll bring your concerns to the Office of Science and Technology and let them know, that you have a concern that there needs to be improved outreach. And then the other that relates to the prioritization of voluntary reporting. There are two things I would like to point to for this year. There's a National Academies review that I think that the report is expected sometime in July that looks at the compatibility of MRIP with in-season management. And then there's a second report that from a MAFAC task force on electronic reporting that looks at the feasibility of voluntary methods and the appropriate types of data that they might be used for in terms of their ability to collect data for management purposes. So those two reports are expected sometime this year. I would say the MAFAC report's probably going to be later in the year, but they would be informative in prioritizing any kind of VR initiative. And then the other thing I'll just mention is that NOAA supports non-probability methods in when they're used with a probability method to validate the information that's reported.
Thanks, Richard. Other committee members, I guess one idea I have is it maybe covers a lot of these things, not so much a specific priority, as much as an idea to keep in mind. It might help many is finding ways to make better use of electronic technologies, electronic reporting, electronic monitoring as ways to perhaps make progress on really several of these current priorities.
Thank you, John. And you had asked me at the beginning to kind of touch on timing and maybe respond to a few of these other points. So the first one that you clearly asked was timing. I wanted to raise this now as a thought item, and I really appreciate the ideas and the thoughts that have come out already. This is a document that would take pretty much the rest of this calendar year to get fleshed out by RecTech and would come back to the coordinating council for review and approval, either best case in November or potentially the winter, the February 2022 meeting would be the goal timeline. But putting these ideas out now in terms of what are the issues that are important to kind of flesh out is very, very helpful. So thank you. And did you want?
Thanks, Jeff. Oh, I was going to say I appreciate that, and so I think we can consider this, fair warning that this is going to be underway, and everyone should start working within their own folks that they talk with on their staffs, et cetera, to try to see what our priorities should be.
Yes.
All right.
I don't
Any
think we have a half hour
questions on
worth
that?
of slides, but shall we keep going?
Yeah, I think so. I don't see any further hands, so I think we can move on to the next topic. I think it's been a good discussion, and I appreciate the guidance and ideas.
All right, thank you. Next slide, Maya. Again, I wanted to raise the MRIP survey and data standards that were published in the fall of 2020. Just in the last 2 weeks, there were some website changes and frequently asked questions that were updated by MRIP and their staff to be very helpful. The operations committee had a document added to their meeting, and really to flag this here is the idea that most of the 7 parts of the survey and data standards, most of this is already being covered by MRIP in the general surveys, the APIS, the for-hire telephone survey, the large pelagic survey, and that doesn't really require additional bits or pieces or workload on ACCSP or the partners. They do provide clarifications for things like Paperwork Reduction Act for alternate surveys and some of these other aspects. So when you get away from the general survey approach and go through a different methodology, there are some kind of additional indirect tasks that need to be thought of, and that's included in the survey and data standards. So those made a lot of sense to myself and those that were reviewing them. The item for your awareness at this point is the data presentation changes. So sometime this summer, the shift to present high quality data for MRIP web presentation will be estimates with a PSE less than or equal to 50. Those are the ones, above 50 right now are presented with kind of a red highlight if they're pretty imprecise. Be cautious, but those are going to be not be presented on the website. The other piece would be to provide annual estimates only for past full years, so 1981 forward. And for the current year, instead of providing individual wave-based estimates, it would become cumulative through the year. And that would be, wave 1, 2, 3 would be combined instead of separate waves 1, 2, and 3. Still by state and species and mode, but cumulative through the year. And that presentation would begin this year, and in conversations with all the partners, those wave-based views would be available on the MRIP website for some time, likely through 2022. So I want to put this on your radar as an awareness. As a partner in MRIP data collection, I've already committed to say that ACCSP public warehouse website will match what MRIP does. And we're talking about potential changes in the data warehouse for named user login and additional data presentations for agency staff. So instead of simply presenting for a period of time for the assessment and management to kind of catch up to the available in presentation and the direction that MRIP is heading on this, to use the platform of ACCSP as a standard way to run those calculations and present it out to help the partners and their staff instead of pushing that workload off. So again, if you have questions, you can submit those over email. We'll get someone from MRIP to help gather that information and present to you at a future meeting. It didn't want to do that right now because when they are able to present these tools sometime in the summer, we'll have a better ability to kind of see what they're talking about and look at that either at the August meeting or a little bit later. So I'm going to pause there because I see Richard's hand up.
Yeah, Jeff, I just wanted to just add some context to that. I mean, basically, the standards would affect the publication of estimates on the NOAA website. So anything above a 50% PSE wouldn't be published. And the reason for doing this is not really just to censor the data. It is really to put us in line with what other statistical surveys do. There are standards for publication of data that are met by, you know, different surveys such as the Census and CDC and BLS and their estimates that they produce. However, that said, the raw data or the microdata that can be used to develop estimates at different domain levels will still be available, and tools will be available for users to generate their own estimates. It just really affects what we would publish on our website so that we're more consistent with other surveys.
Thank you, Richard. And yes, the survey data itself would continue to be available on the MRIP website. Just did not have that on my slide. I see Lynn's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a couple questions about this, and some of it may be due to my incomplete understanding. So I appreciate your forbearance. But on the not listing data or estimates with a PSE greater than 50, will the website present which species those are? So would it say, like, for example, you know, I don't know, snowy grouper, no estimate, PSE greater than 50, so that people can actually see which species fell into that category? That's one question. And I had a second question maybe after that answer.
I think that's an excellent question, and why, and since it hasn't been shown out to me, or I don't know what group is working on it, since we don't have that visibility yet, that was part of why I would want to wait until it's presented alongside the current data later this summer before we kind of have that discussion. But otherwise, I would rely on Richard or someone else from MRIP to answer that.
Yeah, then I can bring that up with the folks that are working on the web queries.
Yeah.
Because, you know, right now we just have a suite of species that we cover through the drop-down menus, and you know, if you pulled up one of those, it would produce no estimate where the PSE was greater than 50%. So I'll get clarification on whether if you include a suite of species, you know, those are excluded or not.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then my second question has to do with the wave specific data. And the first part of it is kind of philosophical, that if a wave specific estimate has a PSE that's less than 50, you know, or even less than 30, for example, why not present it? And then the second part of that is, I'm assuming, so this is going to now be cumulative. So I'll go and on in maybe to March sometime or April and see wave 1. And then the next time later in the year, I'll see the estimate for wave 1 plus 2. So if I kept wave 1 written down, I could subtract it from wave 2 and get wave specific estimates. And I just want to be clear that there will be no way for the public really to go back and look at the cumulative estimates, if that makes sense. So once you get to wave 3, you have that cumulative estimate, but you're not going to be able to go back and get the wave 1 and 2 cumulative estimate?
Well, yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case, because you may all, once you're doing a cumulative estimate, once you reach that 50% threshold, it doesn't really matter what the PSE is for the following waves. So if you reached it in wave 2, for instance, you could have all of the subsequent waves below or greater than 50, and they would be added, and you could back calculate your estimate. But the thing is that the concern for us is publishing the estimates on the website, and so we are providing the tools for people to do this. So I don't think that it's an issue for people to go back and do subtractive types of exercises to get to the estimates that they're looking for. But we are providing the tools anyway, so they'll be able to get wave level estimates. They'll still be able to do that.
Thank you, so.
Yeah, if it was a privacy concern, yeah, we would try to cover that, but that I think would get very complicated.
All right, thanks. Joe, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to say it's obviously very important that technical staff get a chance to look at this. We're going through rec reform initiatives that are going to require being able to see the raw data still, but it's been a tough world for the fluke and sea bass fishermen on the Atlantic coast. They pay a lot of attention, and I do have some concerns with what they're able to see and not see. In 2020, our 4 main federally managed species that are rec important, flounder scup, sea bass, and bluefish, all exceeded their RHLs. And I think the public are very interested in transparency, and they're on these websites trying to see who's the culprit. Spoiler alert, it's usually New York and New Jersey. But if suddenly they're not able to see some of this data, I do have some concerns on where it goes. I understand that there's standards, but we all know this survey is very different than a lot of the surveys we deal with. So I know it's just the way it's going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised that there's some public interest in losing some transparency.
Yeah, Joe, that's a good point, and I feel that way too. Obviously, coming from the council perspective in an area with a lot of high PSC species, there could be some issues with transparency if a fishery gets closed early or some other in-season accountability measure applied, or even postseason if the end of the year is over 50 and nobody can actually see that information. I expect it'll raise some concerns with saying, well, you don't think the data is good enough to tell the public, but you do think it's good enough to impose restrictions on the public using it. But I think we'll just see how that plays out in the court of public opinion and maybe the legal courts as this process goes forward, because my impression is MRIP has made this decision and we'll just have to deal with the consequences of it.
Thanks, everybody.
Richard, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, just one comment there related to John's concerns. I think that we're rolling this out in a phased approach, so nothing's going to happen overnight. I expect that the earliest would be the middle of next year before we're able to we switch to going to the new standard for publication. I mean, we do acknowledge the fact that sometimes the data you have is what you have, but in the interests of improving the survey and the estimates that we get, we have to hold ourselves to a standard. I think that at least the other statistical surveys do, and try to work with our partners as best we can to make sure that they have the data they need to base the management decisions that they have, to make them as informed as they can.
Thanks, Richard. And Jeff, I don't see any further hands, so I think we can move ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody, for your discussion on that and bringing that up. And as I said, if you've got other ideas that you'd like us to flesh out and find responses for, please go ahead and email those to me after the meeting. Maya, next slide, please. All right, the next section is really about software. We've been presenting some of these redesign type ideas in the past, and just a kind of a revision, revisiting, what does redesign mean? And it's really being labeled as safe as version 2. The picture on the left was kind of how the online was developed, then the upload was developed, then the mobile was developed, and they were kind of 3 different functional processing that were developed at different times, and therefore it took a lot more work to keep those aligned and processing the same way and doing all the same data validations and those things. So the redesign for all the different modules really to look to take the different pathways of data coming in, use one set of gears and process the data the same way. And it's both efficient from a programming standpoint, and it's a bit more robust because you're putting it in one place and you don't lose track of an exception that you had programmed in at one point. And so it provides, as you see in the big green check marks there, consistency, efficiency, and ultimately flexibility back to the partners, because it allows for a change to be implemented across all those platforms. And guess what? Do exactly what ACCSP is all about, which is at least providing standardization of our own tools in terms of what questions are being asked, how the data are being validated, and how things go forward. So a big part of the redesign and why it's taking a long time is this data processing in the code that goes toward that means to an end is a lot of invisible but highly useful and time-consuming work. It includes the API, the application programming interface that interacts with our systems as well as other vendors' systems to get the data in. The piece that folks see, Maya, next slide, please, is the user interface redesign. And so on the left, there's the pictures of the online. So the older version of online, you see more boxes and highlights and drop-down lists. Those things tend to still exist, but if you notice the picture on the bottom of the redesigned eTrips interface, it's a simpler look and feel. It's got a better flow to it, and it has more validations that are included in that. And a similar approach has been taken with eTrips Mobile 2, so that's on Android, iOS, and Windows platforms. And the beauty of what's been done underneath this is the switchboard features. So where questions have to show up based on a user permit or a species or a whole suite of items that different partners have in place, once that switchboard change has been made centrally, those extra questions immediately show up in both the online and the mobile setup. And so it relies a bit more on the partner management to get that all right. On the other hand, that's where the flexibility comes back in. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight and re-show you what some of those pictures are and what that looks like. But it ultimately does improve the standardization of ACCSP software platforms, and it simplifies to the extent possible. There's a lot of people that want to ask a lot of questions, the data entry. And so staff are constantly looking for approaches to improve that efficiency. One of the areas looking forward, there's been a lot of work on spatial map tools to collect various location information. So instead of collecting up to 4 or 5 different areas, a statistical area, a sub area, a local area, a lobster management area, a shellfish area, things go on that pathway, but to provide tools where, clicking within a map grid or multiple map grids for the lobster 10-minute squares allows an easier data entry that can suffice for multiple questions on the form and still end up getting the partners the data fields that they need for their requirements. And so those are some really cool things that are happening and will continue to be rolled out. And a side note on that is, you know, as some of these new software tools have been released, we're also allowing some of the historical data entry tools to function for consistent calendar year 2020 data entry. There are still some paper forms that are being processed at the partner level and entered into the system by staff. And we expect that to continue through June before we can kind of take some of the older tools and retire those off. And we do those retirements and phases in a very communicated way to make sure that those timelines are supported by the partners that are relying on those systems. And next slide, please. Thanks, Maya. And so looking forward, we hear Safe as redesign, and yet Safe as redesign, Safe as itself is a pretty big umbrella. So when we speak specifically about e-trips, well, it has the mobile, the online, and the upload components. This year, those got rolled out on different days, even though they were within a 3-month period. And we're still doing some modifications for CRO and other partners, but the intent is to complete the e-trips redesign and bug fixes in major programming parts by June. And one piece of that is the PC or the E1 ticket used by South Carolina and Georgia. That functionality has been built in to e-trips at this point to be able to create a dealer report for the partners that need it. That is out in test for partners to test, and we expect that to go into production in cooperation with our partners sometime soon, and hopefully this summer. And then the electronic dealer reporting was one of the major forays into data collection for ACCSP, starting back in 2003, 2004 with the federal electronic dealer reporting. And so that's also ripe for a redesign, and the action plan had a goal to really move further on that in 2021. E-trips is taking a little bit longer, but for good reason and doing well. And so while there's a desire to have the EDR done, the amount of work for that to happen and be robust and roll out online, upload, and mobile on the same day means that there'll be development in 2021, testing probably early to mid 2022, and that production TBD is really reliant on how long the development takes, what kind of testing occurs, and some of the decision points of should that be released mid-fishing year, or is it really better to do it at a calendar year? And even if we're done with the development and testing side, to not go all in on the production push for these things until a partner agreed on date. So with that, there's other areas under registration traction, lobster trap tag, other systems that ACCSP supports, but those are the major focus points I wanted to at least put on your awareness screen for today. And with that, a lot of what happens in Safe as e-trips it relates to the one-stop reporting objective. Julie has been leading that as our deputy director and doing a great job leading at least the ACCSP side of that. The project is led by others, but I'm going to turn it over to Julie now to lead and walk you through a couple of our items.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Maya, can you go forward, please? Thank you. So the one-stop reporting project, the real objective here is we're developing technical specifications for the EVTR system, and the goal here is to enable an operator to fill out a single EVTR and satisfy the reporting requirements of multiple fishing management authorities on the East Coast whether that be CIRO or the Science Center with the CFIRE program, HMS, GARFO, and also the states. And so Maya, I think if you click, it should bring in, yay, okay. That brings in our team members, and this was an FIS project that Barry Clifford headed up, and this is the list of all of the PIs, and as you can see, there's a range of folks from many of the agencies I already mentioned here. And on the next slide, what you can see is that, you know, basically what we have is happened is we got into this and we realized that the project was much larger than we had really been ready to do, especially given the timing of some of the things that are coming along. And so we have the Mid-Atlantic and New England mandatory reporting coming along this year. And, you know, the promise was out there that we would have some sort of application ready so that folks who had to do this mandatory reporting could do so and didn't have to fill out multiple reports. And so what we realized was we weren't going to be able to do the full objective in the timeline that was necessary. So Maya, I think you can click twice more or once more. There we go. Thank you. Perfect. And so really what we're doing here is there's the current phase that we're in right now. And in order to meet the timing objectives, what we've done is we've broken this up into 2 phases. And so our goal for mid-2021 is essentially to have an OSR compliant application, and that's going to be the eTrips application. And that would allow someone to fill out their report, and it will be good for the CFIRE reporting, it will be good for HMS reporting, it will be good for the GARFO reporting, and then theoretically it will also be important for the Southeast Commercial Logbook reporting. Right now, the CFIRE reporting and the GARFO reporting are already covered, as is the HMS reporting. We're making a few tweaks to the HMS for June just to make sure that it meets all of their requirements. We're also working with the Southeast Commercial Logbook program, and so our goal is to meet their timelines as they need us to. And so once we get through phase 1, what we're going to do is we're going to use the existing technical specifications and some new documentation to essentially create a tech spec for this first phase. And then we're going to move into phase 2. And this will pick up any remaining federal programs. It's also going to pick up all of the state reporting. So really, the objective long-term hasn't changed. We just needed to break it up into 2 phases so that we could achieve our goals. And this is where we are now. So before I move on, are there any questions?
I'm not seeing any, Julie. Oh, wait, Renee? Yep.
Thank you, Julie. Is there a timeline for being able to integrate the state reporting? I mean, I know this is a guesstimate for you, but state reporting requirements with our dual federal permit holders who are reporting through GARFO or another federal authority?
Yeah, I think what has to happen is we need to get through the middle of this year and complete phase 1. And then once we do that, we'll start scoping phase 2. And I think the questions at that point will become, you know, again, do we bite off everything and go forward and do all of phase 2 at once? Or is there low-hanging fruit and or some priorities, and lobsters coming to mind, of things that need to happen sooner, in which case maybe we work on those first. And so perhaps phase 2 doesn't happen all at once, but I would say that probably within the next 2 to 3 months, we'll actually probably be able to be in a position to start scoping that. And I think it has the potential to break phase 2 up, and so we can achieve some of the things that are higher priority first.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Maya, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so the 2020 spring load. This was another excellent year. Big kudos to all of the ACCSP partners and also the data team staff. We were able to officially release the data 4 days before the official deadline of when we needed to have it ready. So this was really, you know, another success of partner coordination. There were a couple of partners that just were not going to be able to make the deadline. And that's just due to staffing and other COVID related issues. You know, we wanted to be able to present those data publicly prior to our standard fall load. So this year, we're going to have a midsummer load. And the first email for the midsummer load actually went out yesterday. And so we're going to be able to pick up the North Carolina and New York data sets in June, and then we're going to be able to release those data around July 4th. So in early July, we'll be able to publicly release data that includes all of the North Carolina and New York data sets. There are some data that is out there, but right now, it's not complete New York or North Carolina data. And so because of this, what we're going to do is bump the fall deadline. Normally you see the data in September. That'll probably get bumped by about a month, just so that we give everyone a little bit of a break and we're not constantly doing data loads. But wanted to let everybody know that one, we truly appreciate everybody's cooperation this spring, especially because we know that a lot of the staff that work with us have also been doing a lot of work for the CARES Act. And so everyone has been exceptionally busy. We also appreciate everybody, you know, responding to this, you know, midsummer load, and hopefully this adjustment in schedule by adding a load to the process will make data available as soon as possible to everyone. Okay, I'm going to go straight into the bio module. So Maya, can you go to the next slide? Okay, great, thank you. So the biological module has really sort of taken off in terms of development. There was a biological working group, and this included folks from the biological panel, but also from the BICATCH committee, the RecTech committee, some HMS staff, and then ACCSP staff. And really the goal here was to create biological sample standards that included a unit of measure. And they've been able to do this. The data structures were updated by the biological review panel quite a few years ago, and those have now been implemented as well. But the need for the sample standard to update as well was really because there are samples that were being collected where codes did not exist, and so those codes needed to be created. And we also realized that there were places where lengths were being collected where the unit of measure was not being determined. And so it was important to make sure that we had a standard that met the needs of all the samples being collected, but also had flexibility to adjust to anything new. So we have added all of these codes into the system. We also brought in a couple of additional ones so that we could accommodate some of the existing data and also provide that flexibility moving forward. So what we've been able to do so far is we're moving the historical data into the new data structures in production. And we are also, Maya, if you can go to the next slide. We have been working with the Jonah Crab folks on their upcoming assessment. Their data, their biological data is being added in, and this is the first stream really to use the new transfer format. We did get comments from folks who have been sending biological data. We have been getting a limited amount of biological data for specific species. So folks that had already been using the transfer format did note that, you know, it wasn't easy to change that transfer format and use the new version. However, ACCSP feels that once you've made the change, then the change is in place and you have the flexibility moving forward. So we understand that the change is difficult, but we're hoping that that burden is going to lessen as folks make the change. And also for those folks that haven't been using the biological transfer format, whatever they come on board using is going to be new to them regardless. So we're going to continue to do outreach so we can improve the data flow and work with everyone on the new transfer format. And we're also going to start seeking out new data streams moving forward so that we can slowly but surely really start populating the biological module with the biological data that's available at the partner level. Does anyone have any questions before I pass it back to Jeff?
I'm not seeing any, so we've got about 2 minutes left. So let's pass it over to Jeff and see if we can't move through these last few things pretty quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and everybody. We have 3 slides here. Maya, go ahead and one more slide. This is a summary of what's already been posted in the materials for what projects were funded. And so I don't need to spend a lot of time here other than making sure that I say a thank you to Florida for being aware and returning some funds that didn't need to be, that they weren't able to use on the project that it was intended for with the headboat. And when we came up a little bit less, and I say a little bit, but about $54,000 less than expected in the funding from NOAA, we found ways to make some adjustments, and in doing and still fund all the projects. So Rhode Island took a small subtraction, which was agreed to back in February. Between February and now, PRFC was really willing to support projects coast-wide by reducing the cost of their project by $48,000. And so that may affect some of their completion points, but in their first year, they thought that that was very doable. So thank you to Florida and PRC and Rhode Island in doing that. And it flags that the admin grant, about $138,000 less than the option 1, which was a new data team lead, and a new software team member. And then there were further reductions in when we could actually hire those and fill the data team position, and cut a little bit more out for meetings and things because of how the year's going. So all those things are happening, and I just want to flag that while we think we're still going to be pretty successful, there might be some associated tasks that we may have to change the timelines on because of that. Next slide, please. This reiterates a little bit of the same idea that fiscal year 2021, we really prioritized, and the leadership team I have to thank for this, the partner project funding, the admin grant reductions, the data team supervisor was posted and offered, but we needed to repost that position and to backfill the data team lead spot and have Julie on one job as deputy director instead of doing 2 jobs. So that's the pathway. And one of the things that's coming up on future staffing, this goes to the admin grant proposal for next year. The software team at the moment and ACCSP staff in general has really great capability and backup standpoints on database storage, record processing, some of the programming pieces. However, we are requesting kind of growth in the areas of mobile app development. Right now, that's all contractor based. And so the maintenance and deployment of that is something that I see us needing to onboard a bit more. The other item would be kind of the mobile app testing across environments and features. And that's something where we've tried in the past to back off a little bit and request partners to help out with that. But because of the number of features and the number of partner specific flexibility, that testing gets a little bit dicey, and partners don't always have time to do that testing. And so to provide robust applications that have been thoroughly vetted and tested, some additional staff time is requested there.
So Jeff, I have a question from Kathy.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, it wasn't so much a question as that I would just like to publicly acknowledge Julie's work in 2 positions right now. It's continued a little bit on since you're having to repost, but I don't know how she does it. I've had the honor of working with her for months on a project, and she is the queen of time management and prioritization, and I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you
Well
very
put,
much.
Kathy. Thank you. Yeah.
Very well put. Whenever we need organization, I always check with Julie first. Does this fit? Are these good colors? But project management is absolutely one of her strong suits, which is why we have her as deputy director to keep us all moving. I have one more slide, and then there may or may not be questions or time for questions, but go ahead, Maya, bump it forward one. So I think some of these things have already been noted. There's a goal to include the ACCSP leadership team to comment on next year's admin grant proposal before it gets done. The process last year noted the need to get some comments in earlier, so we're going to be doing that. And also, earlier in the proposal process, there's the opportunity for staff to work with ops and advisors in the rankings and the awareness to note what impacts are in other proposals or on the ACCSP workload within that review process. And if there are funding items for things like the Safest Help Desk that should be part of the partner projects, then we can add those in early in the process. And again, while there are projects that are stacking up in the maintenance and the new areas and the amount of funding, I think we're quickly going to have more need and more desire for projects than funding available. But the leadership team and the process in general is really supporting opportunities to find and rank projects that have the greatest potential for regional impacts and efficiencies. So developing a tool that can be used by many partners. The VMS integration into Safest seems to be one of those high impact projects that, you know, a year and a half, 2 years in, and may have some really use coming up in the next year as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking at in our ongoing discussions and trying to balance out the growth of staff versus the reliance on contractors and the ability to maintain things that we're developing in-house. So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, everybody, for your focus today.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Any further questions? We're 10:35, so about ready to wrap it up if there's nothing else. Sold. We are done, and we hand it back over to, I guess, Bob, for your prepping for your next meeting.